Okay, we can start with the place and date of birth and everything.
I was born in Bay City, Michigan on May 3rd, 1917. And I had one brother, but he was drowned at the age of 4 when I was only 2. And I was raised, however, with a cousin who was 3 years older than I was. And because of economic conditions, he lived with his grandmother, and my grandmother was ill, and my mother took care of her. So as a family, we lived all together. My grandparents, his cousin, and myself.
Your mother and father.
Did most people
My mother and father.
Did most people live in or more family groups, larger family groups?
They did.
Yeah, I would say so. Families were larger in those days.
Okay. What?
I mean, but I was the youngest of 9 children, but most of my brothers and sisters had left home before when I was raised. I was raised with 2 brothers and myself, and I was born on July 14, 1917, and I lived with my mother and father. We had moved. I was born in Rayco, Michigan, which is in the Upper Peninsula, but then we moved to Wyandotte, Michigan, and my father opened a business fish market there and poultry, and we lived in a single home with her mother and father and my 2 brothers and my sister.
Okay, how about some background on your parents and what
I was born the youngest of, and my mother was 40 years old. My father was 46, and he worked in a sawmill, and he was also called a sawyer, and he was had always been in the lumbering business all of his life. He started as a young man. He was the youngest child of a family without a father, and there was very difficult times during that time because there was no preparation for orphans or widows or people that didn't have an income. So the young members of the family had to work very young. They were like 12, 13 when they went to work, and consequently they didn't have much schooling. They attended a one-room schoolhouse, and they were poor at that time, and they would only
interrupt you. They had no compulsory school laws at that time where you had to go until you were 16.
So he only probably completed like the 4th or 5th grade, and then he had to go to work. And he was held back at school because they didn't have free books or anything. He had to wait till a richer child who had more finished his books, and then he would be able to use his books to continue his grade. So it was difficult during those years.
My grandparents came from Sweden, and they came over here in our way. They worked in those days. There wasn't sufficient money to bring them all over at one time. So part of the family, or one member of the family, would come over and make a certain amount of money. They'd send money back to Sweden and bring one person over. Then the 2 of them would save their money and send for another one until they got all those over here who wanted to go. And my grandparents had a land grant at that time, which was given by the government to those persons coming from other countries, foreign countries. And what they would do is they would have to work the land and improve it so much in order to keep the land.
Okay, let's see. Well, how young did you work? When did you start working?
Well, there weren't too many jobs when I was young, so I didn't. I used to help my aunt in the grocery store. She had a grocery store.
What year was
that? That was during the Depression. Probably was about 1932. So that would have been what, 15, 14, 15, somewhere in there. But actually to start to work, I didn't really until I was a senior year in high school. It had been in 1934. I started out working there at 15 cents an hour. And but one of the fellows with whom I worked was married, had 2 children, and his weekly salary was $18. But prior to that time, it might be interesting to think that before that time, probably in 1931, 32, somewhere in there, in the summertime, well, I should say fall of the year mostly, there were very few jobs because of the Depression. But I used to go out with another fellow, work on a farm, either weeding the gardens, or else what I remember mostly was picking up potatoes for 2 cents a bushel. Pick up the potatoes and sack them and throw them up on the truck. For 2 cents a bushel, we had our goal was to pick 75 bushel a day. And naturally, we'd have to start about 6:30 in the morning and work at about 5 in the afternoon in order to do this.
Well, my first job was in 1933. I worked in the dollar store, is what they called it, and I think we made 25 cents an hour. And you would really probably just worked all day Saturday. You'd work from 9 to 9 on Saturday. Then after that, my father had this fish market business, and they lost it during the Depression, probably in 1934. They lost it because they had to go and file bankruptcy because like the A&P store were selling fish as a come-on cheaper than they could buy it to wholesale. So it was just bad times, and a lot of people ran charge accounts, and they were there was a lot of money owed them on the books, like you say. They would run their fish would be delivered, and their chickens and fowl would be delivered, and then they'd charge it, and they just couldn't function, so they had to file bankruptcy because they had more money on the books, but they didn't have any cash money. So, and then during my high school years, I was fortunate to work for the city of Wyandotte and work in do summer jobs, and I made pretty good money during that time. Was able to put myself through my last 2 years of high school.
Where did most of the money go that you made during this first couple jobs?
Well, it would support me. It would buy my clothes and pay my tuition to go to. I went to a parochial school, and I paid my tuition, paid my music lessons, and kind of supported myself and paid for most of my graduation expenses, because I was fortunate to have these fairly good summer jobs. I was able to do this.
Now I had saved from the time, I guess, out of birth, different presents and things like that. I had been able to save about $500 was in the bank. And when the Depression hit and the stock market crash, all of my money was tied up. They closed the banks and they wouldn't let them pay out the money because they didn't have enough monies to pay everybody who had savings in it and had what they call a run on the bank. The banks, as I say, couldn't supply everybody their money back. They didn't have ready cash on hand. At that time, the banks, saved persons who had the savings account, they did not have a guarantee by the government that they would pay any money they had in there. So actually what it ended up, I was lucky to get 10 cents on the dollar of the money that I had saved in the bank. But also I might add that we were more or less fortunate because of the fact that my dad was a federal employee, and he was able to had steady income coming in, and which had to support my grandparents. And I had 2 aunts in the vicinity also. And we used to have to help feed them and also supply their coal for heat. And so my dad was sure not able to save anybody, that was for sure. One of the things that I recall most vividly was the big, long, what they called bread lines for those who were unemployed, which was practically everyone, had to stand in to get flour that the government was supplying, flour and cheese. Most, I guess, those were the predominant things. The government was giving away. Dried milk was another one. And the other thing I can remember, that the kids that I went to school, especially from the poor families, that when they would get a hole in the bottom of their shoes, they'd put cardboard in there to cover the holes in the shoes. Of course, it was wet as snow, and the cardboard didn't hold up too well. Of course, I remember also gasoline being $10 or 10 gallons for a dollar, for a dollar, 10 cents a gallon. You'd have gas wars at times when it would be even cheaper than that.
During the high school years, the dress codes were very limited, and I remember this sort of thing. We couldn't afford. Usually, the schools wore uniforms, but we couldn't afford uniforms, so we wore a smock over our clothes to really save our clothes, and also to have clean. Also save the cleaning bill, that we could wash these smocks, and it really helped the families, and there wasn't any of the children better dressed than others. This was a code, and we also had to close our high school earlier, like in May, to save on the expense of salaries and that for the teachers and that. So they cut the hours and cut it shorter. And I remember you could go to a school dance for 10 cents. And I think
this was a big thing.
this was a school dance, and that you could go very reasonable. Sometimes they'd even have prizes that you could, they would have a little bingo game maybe, that you could win a small basket of groceries that would kind of compensate to get people to come. That was.
But that's another thing. I mean, most of the parochial schools and private schools closed up because they were unable to support themselves. Most of them had to go to public school.
That's what Darren Lorme did. They finished up at the public school. That the schools had to close. The Catholic schools had to close.
Well, most of the parochial
All the parochial, Lutheran or whatever, had to close.
Well, what kind of other entertainment?
Dancing was a primary entertainment. I mean, that was a big thing. Of course, about that time too, radios were coming in, and the first one I remember I heard was a little crystal set. They had a little hair like on a crystal, and they'd find the station somehow. I don't know the principle of it, but I know that people would sit around the table, a family sit around the table, and you put the set or the earphones in a bowl, and then it would everybody could hear the sound, amplified the sound, and you could hear it. Then when the first radios came in, there were battery radios, they weren't electric, plugged into the wall. Battery, you had to have a charger and everything. The batteries charged, they all kinds of static. One of the favorite things that people would do that had the radios were to sit up all hours of the night to see what distant stations they could get. One of the favorite stations was WGN in Chicago, another was KDKA in Pittsburgh, but if you be up until the early hours of the morning, you're liable to get, from California, somewhere up in Canada,
Illinois.
different places. That was kind of a hobby with a lot of people. I remember the first car I got it with another fella. This would have probably been about 1933, maybe. And that was a Model T Ford. And we paid $20 for it. We each put $10 in for it to pay for the car. And we got it after quite a bit of arguing with our parents about getting a car. And I remember the first time we would have got a block away and the right front tire blew out. Because in those days they had inner tubes in the tires. The tires were hard and narrow rim. And the Model T Ford was a high car, and you had to be careful when you go around the corner and you didn't tip the car over. But
I remember another form of entertainment. Everyone didn't own a bicycle. I mean, there are few and far between bicycles. So we were able to go to different areas, park areas, and rent a bicycle. And you rent it for the whole evening or the whole day for 25 cents. And that way you would, dates. You'd go on a date and you'd go and rent a bicycle and you'd ride around the park.
Mhm.
And that was one of the inexpensive things that you could do. Mostly the girls didn't own a bicycle. Maybe most of the boys did, but to get a girl's bicycle, it was kind of out of the question.
Do you have any driving memories?
Driving memories? Yes, I started driving at 15 years old. And when you went, you had to have somebody sign for you. I went down to the police station and I had my brother take me down there, and I remember it cost 50 cents to get to my driver's license. That's what you pay, and then you had to pay a notary to sign it. But that's what it cost to get my driver's license. And then I mostly at that time, everyone didn't go to college. If you were able to get a job, you thought you were very fortunate. And some of the girls would take business course, which would take about 6 months, and then they would go into working in offices as secretaries and that. But most of the girls didn't go to college because the only profession for girls was, well, nursing. It was a 3-year of nursing, or they would become teachers or secretaries. There wasn't a big field for girls in college. And if you were able to get a good job, which I was fortunate I did, I didn't go to college and I didn't have to take a business course. I just started right out of high school working, and I remember at that time I was making $25 a week, which was considered very good. No benefits. And I remember when they didn't take out Social Security. I remember the day that they started to take out Social Security, because I was working in payroll. I remember everybody was complaining because we took a certain percent out of each check, and everybody complained that day.
Well, I started driving sooner, but I got my license at the age of 14. And I learned to drive on a Model T, not the one that we bought, but my dad's before that. And actually, I mean, very few people had cars. There weren't too many people had
Or telephone.
So there wasn't a problem of backups in driving as far as traffic was concerned. There were relatively few cars going.
And the telephones, you got the operator would say operator, and then you would give a number, and it would be like 232 or 323, and it was very small numbers. And then later on, they started with the M's and the J's, and which were party lines. And everyone during the Depression, it would be very unusual for all homes to have a phone. You would go to the neighbors, you'd get a telephone call, and they would have your neighbor's number, and you'd run over and get them and come back to answer the phone.
Is there anything else you wanted to add about how you went to school?
Walk to school.
Yeah. In high school, I had
I think you had to tell me more
a
about
little
your
over
college.
go off. But one other thing about the cars, I mean, many of the cars, they didn't have starters. I mean, you had to crank the cars. Long. The car would kick back and you weren't holding the crank handle just right. A lot of people had broken wrists and broken forearms. That thing could snap back and catch you. And to heat your cars, used to have heaters. The first heaters were kind of manifold heaters.
Mm-hmm.
Just coming up from the motor and the exhaust pipe that you get there. You wouldn't get a lot of heat, but you get some heat. But the fumes, they were worse than all was freezing. Then the first heaters they had some, well, first of all, I mean, to keep your car from freezing up in the wintertime, you had to put alcohol in the car. And if the weather would warm up a little bit, then the alcohol would boil over.
It'd boil.
Put water in it until it got cold again. Then you had to quit putting alcohol back in it. But the heaters that you had were hot water heaters. And you used to get used to be a little valve on it. You had to let the air out of when they did an airlock in there and open it up. And you couldn't open that thing up without it blowing off. Sometimes you had to keep your finger over one place where you found the needle to put back in. And then I would smell up the whole car.
Tell about the entrance in college and the prices.
Oh yeah. Now, when I was fortunate enough to be able to go to college, the first 2 years I went to junior college. It was at home. I was able to live at home and go there. But then when I went away to school, this was at Michigan, University of Michigan. It's hard to believe now, but and I had to watch myself real carefully. I wasn't able to go to every event that came along, but I kept track records for the time that I was there, and what it actually cost me was $250 a semester. This included everything: room, board, eating, and tuition and everything else. $500 a year for the 2 years that I was at Michigan.
Because that was a lot of money.
Yeah. But I mean, you go to the store and buy $5 worth of groceries, you take two of you to carry it home, and you were really loaded down.
Okay, how about dating?
Where did that go?
When in college, I wasn't able to do a lot because I didn't have much money. But what I did do, go to a football game or something like that.
You used to have tea
But,
dances.
one other thing. I told you before that I had started out at 15 cents an hour in the A&P store. Well, when I went to Ann Arbor, when I went to Michigan, I got a job there too in the A&P store. And at that time, I doubled my money. I was making 30 cents an hour when I was there.
So that was in 2 years. It went up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's anything like on October 29th when the stock market actually fell, was it panic or was it really just like any other day?
Well, for the average person, the average person, didn't feel the effects of it until sometime after. But the headlines that come up, people were jumping out of the window, committing suicide and everything because they'd lost everything that they had in the stock market when it crashed.
Did you really feel the effects of the whole depression in your family?
Yes, I felt the effects of it because my dad, although my dad had a steady job and a regular income, he had to take care of the in-law families and grandparents who were out of work, unemployed, because where we were in Bay City, this was an industrial town. Most of the people there worked at the Chevrolet motor.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have to guess that probably over half of the people who were there worked there. This is where our in-laws worked too. They just didn't have any job. When they did were able to work. I can tell you one uncle, I mean, in order to try to get by, he used to go out to my grandfather's farm, cut down sapling trees and make close poles out of them, wooden close poles out, and go around from house to house and you sell them for 25 cents a piece. Another thing, farmers used to come in and sell their eggs to us for 10 cents a dozen. And their vegetables, I mean, everything was practically giveaway, but even then they had a difficult time because the people didn't have the 10 cents. But, as I say, I was fortunate that my dad did have a steady job.
Another thing that they did during the Depression, people that had big homes would take in roomers. And these were men who were working, mostly they took men or women, but it was mostly men that were working in the factories and that. And they would rent a room for them, and that was a means of income too. And there were a lot of people that went around. I know of a little French lady that sold bread. She'd bake bread, and then she'd go around to customers and tell 2 loaves of hot bread for $1, and that was a way of making money. They tried everything, what using their talents or their abilities to make an income for themselves. And most people did. The children, young people lived at home. They didn't leave home because everybody would share their income. I mean, everybody put it all in a pot, and the mother or the father would assemble what you had. You really didn't have your own salary too much in those days.
You ask a bit back about what other sorts of entertainment. Because entertainment versus still played ball or football, but baseball, they're real hard to come by. And I can remember sewing covers back onto baseballs. We'd have it, and then when they'd get real bad, the cover would wear out. Then you'd tape the baseball, black tape on it. Use them until they were no longer usable.
Roller skating was another thing. You had to clamp roller skates, and you do that on dates, and that you'd have roller skating parties, and maybe end up with a bonfire and weenie roast, that kind of
Ice
thing.
skating.
And they did a lot of ice skating
They
there.
had clubs, clamp skates on them that fit over your shoe, tighten them up.
Lots of times the girls to go on a date, they would invite you went around in groups usually. 2 or 3 or 4 couples would come, and the girl would bake a cake or something, and they'd come in, and that would be the refreshments that night. But the girl furnished that because the boy paid for the show or whatever it was.
Well, I guess, how would you feel that was a lot different from it is now? Do you think it's a lot different in the 30s, or what was the most different? The way people lived?
I think we were more united. We were closer. It seemed to be more in groups. You had more friends. You shared a ride. You shared everything. You were more. You learned to share.
You're more dependent on your neighbors.
I think there was a closeness. And if you were going to church, I remember my father would be driving to church. We only really used the car on Sunday. You got it out of the garage and went to church. You'd go around. I remember as a little girl going around and asking the neighbors if they wanted to ride. You shared. You learned to share because that was what you did.
Maybe one person on the block had a telephone. Everybody on the block used the telephone.
I think we could use more of that now.
I think it created good Christian living. I mean, if you had something, you shared it with someone, and it was not too strange, especially in the people who lived out of town and in the country area, for people to come along and stop and ask for meals. They used to do that. I've heard I didn't experience that, but people who had farms, there'd be men that were out, and they would come and knock on the door, and people would feed one another. They did that too, especially the farmers who had food.
Your roads were terrible. I mean, most of them were dirt roads. Spring of the year, they were really wicked. They always break the springs on cars.
I remember my uncle telling This would be way before the Depression days when he had his first car. He just went and bought one, practiced going around the blocks a few times in Detroit, and then he decided to drive up north to Sheboygan. And he tipped over the cars when they tipped over 7 times on the way to Sheboygan. And they'd be real dusty and dirty, and they got there because the roads, the ruts, and they'd say they didn't have maps or anything like that, and they'd say, well, they'd go the best road, and that would probably be the right road to take. They'd go by the most traveled road.
A lot of the cars had side curtains on. Keep the rain and snow.
And then you'd pack a lunch, and you'd stop at a schoolhouse and put water in your car. You'd always carry out a container, and then you'd stop and sit on the schoolhouse steps, and you'd have water, and they had an outside pump, and you'd eat your lunch, and there'd be outhouses, and then you'd go on in your travels. There was not many restaurants.
Oh, I think all I really wanted to ask that was left is like, what did people think about how the government was going and how the country was run, like FDR and the New Deal and all that?
Well, I think Hoover was the man who was president at the time of the crash, so he got blamed for everything, whether he was responsible for it or not. But when
He was a Republican.
when Roosevelt came in, he did things. I mean, he saw a need to make people move. He put in public works programs, and he opened up the banks, and they passed laws. I mean, where the government would insure anybody's savings, put their money in the savings. He tried to instill confidence in the people. He started the CCC camps, which were camps for young people, give them work and things to do. And he had reforestation and everything like that. And he was a man who was able to instill a lot of confidence in the people. And a lot of people, of course, I don't know how many times was he elected? 3 times presidency. And, things begin to pick up. And I would say probably by about 1936, things were beginning to move in the right direction. They had a steady incline up until 1939.
Tell them about the WPA turning over the bricks.
Oh yeah, they give any kind of anything for a job. A lot of cities, instead of having paved roads, of course, had brick roads, which were old, and some of the first improved roads, especially in the cities themselves. So they had a lot of holes and bumps and dips and so on. So some of the jobs would be for these WPA workers, these public work project workers, would be to dig these old brick roads over, turn them upside down, and relay them back there, make the road.
That gave someone a job.
Yeah, give them a job. Some of them were digging drainage ditches.
They dug drainage ditches by a shovel.
By hand, pickaxe and shovel. And clay.
Do you have anything you want to add about them? What people thought of the presidency?
Well, I remember the welfare department. That was big then, that he started in the welfare, that people could come and get a certain amount that weren't working. And I remember people lined up at the city hall trying to get welfare help. And it was thought of, I mean, people didn't want to accept welfare. They would do anything but accept welfare, but some people came to the part that they had to. And I know it was shocking to know that people had to accept welfare. It was hard on a family because they felt that they should all work together and help one another so they wouldn't go on welfare. There was kind of a stigma attached to being on welfare.
Well, I guess I've gone through all my questions and more. All I've got left is anything that would stand out that you think I need. I think we've covered just about everything.
There's a lot of different things you can tell back in those days. I remember when I was a little kid, we didn't even have water pipes in the house here. We used to have to haul it from the well.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't because of the depression, though. It was the way
No.
we lived. So.
Just,
But one thing I remember, the saddest part as a child, I never felt a lot of hardship because my father was in business and the business was going well until the depression, was when they had to file bankruptcy. That was very difficult, and I remember him crying over it, to see all his hard work of all his life and his lifetime investment, what he after he came from the lumber mills and started this business. I remember he was real proud of his store, and they had refrigeration, which was an accomplishment. And there were a lot of, it was considered a modern place, and then to have them come in and they were going to use this store they sold the building, they were going to use the store for something else, and they took all this tile and all these counters and just destroyed them and moved them out so that whoever moved in, if it was a clothing store, moved in afterwards, and it was his whole life, and it was gone.
Mm-hmm.
I remember they didn't have a lot of games and stuff like that. A lot of games, you play a lot of hide and seek and stuff like that.
I mean, at Christmas, if you got a book and maybe you got a game, and you didn't get there aren't many toys. The only toy store I remember was a hardware store that had toys at Christmas, and that was the only time you could buy toys. You made your own toys. Maybe you got a doll. Maybe you had one doll, one buggy, and you didn't have a room full of toys.
When did you feel like, I don't know, the best part of things, like towards the end when things started, the recession started to look better, or after you're out on your own and in college?
Yeah, talking about depression.
After the depression, when do you think the depression was?
Over. When was your time of coming back?
I would guess it was just about completely over by 1939. Not everybody, but most people went back to work. The country seemed to be moving. Because right after that came the war. Could get enough people to work in the factories and places. Most of them.
About 38, you could start to get jobs.
Yeah.
39. Things were looking
up.
up.
Different parts of the
country. People were able to buy homes.
But their confidence.
Another thing about people who had bought homes during the Depression when the market dropped, they owed more on their homes than what they could go and buy a new home for. So that was a hardship to most people. They couldn't let that home go. They had more owed on it, more than a brand new home would cost after the Depression, because the flexibility of the money, people suffered that way. Losing, they lost a lot of their homes.
Well, I guess unless there's anything you want to add,
You have more.
Oh, well, you get better grades, you get more.
I can't think of it.
No, you gave me lots.
For $4,000, you got an exceptional good home.
Yeah, she bought a home for $4,000.
Man, I really got a home.